Evelyn, who is hosting this evening. I think one panelist will join us shortly. I'm about to disappear from the screen and I'm going to leave you to have an absolutely amazing conversation. So thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you, and a very warm welcome to people who are joining right now, and to those who are watching it back on playback. We hope that you get as much from it as we know that we are as we go through a wonderful conversation. So I'm going to start by introducing my panelists. My name's Evelyn Forde. I'm a former head teacher, former president of ASCL. I'm now an executive leader in the education space, and I'm an author. But so that's me. I'm going to go around the virtual room. I'm going to ask my panelists just to introduce themselves, and then I'm going to frame this session, and then I'm going to ask my panelists to give me their kind of reflections, provocations on this really important topic, which is looking at the pipeline and governance. And we've got a lot to unpack over the next hour. So I'm going to start by inviting Sam just to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Sam Sadeghi. I am the Director of Trust Governance at the Confederation of School Trusts. And previously I worked on a couple of large trusts in the country and have done governance for over 10 years now. So yeah, really pleased to be here with this excellent panel. Thank you.
Very warm welcome. Vivienne.
Hello, I'm Vivienne Porritt. I'm the president of Women Ed. I've had several governance and roles. I'm a member of a current trust that is about to merge with another trust, so that's going to be interesting. I've been a chair of governors in a school in London, just behind King's Cross, and I've also been a non-exec director of a larger organisation. And I've enjoyed all of those different characteristics. And with Fee Stag, I've also written an article a few years ago with a provocative question, I hope. Can governance be ethical if it is not diverse? And that's certainly what I'd like to be contributing this afternoon.
Thank you so much. And Patrick.
Thank you very much, Evelyn. So my name is Patrick Cozier, and I am a secondary school head teacher in North London. I've been doing that for quite some time now. This is my 20th year as head teacher, so it's been a while. So I've got a lot of experience, or certainly working with governors. I've been a governor myself, parent governor at my children's school, which is kind of a typical thing to do, I guess. And I also have quite a bit of experience as a trustee of a couple, two charities. So not necessarily school governance, but kind of that whole sphere of trusteeship as well as governance. And I'm almost an author. My first book is due out next month, so do look out for that on calm leadership as well. Sorry for the shameless plug.
Oh, that's fab.
We love a shameless plug. We love it. Thank you so much.
Okay. I'm a 3 times author.
You are?
Well, there you go.
But a 4th time chapter writer, because I've got a chapter in a new book coming out soon. So
amazing. Thank you so much. And just as I was about to say, we will have another panelist joining us.
She is
just seamlessly just kind of zooms in. So it's my pleasure to welcome Sharon to our panel, and just to ask you just to kind of just introduce yourself before I kind of frame the discussion.
Hi, well, I've zoomed in from a members meeting, literally. But my name's Sharon Wilmington. I wear various hats, but I think in this space, the hat I'm wearing is the founder of the National Black Governors Network. And I do a lot of work with organisations around how to recruit and retain diverse governors and trustees.
Yeah. A really warm welcome to everybody. So thank you. So the way that this session is going to work is that I'm just going to start with some statistics, really, just to kind of ground us in this space in terms of what the national picture looks like for governance. But I think you would have already have picked up that our panelists come with a wealth of information, a wealth of experience. And our role is really just to share that with people who are watching this live or indeed watching it on playback. And whenever I lead sessions or do talks, I always say, if people can take 1 or 2 nuggets away with them, then I feel like we will have done a good job. But my feeling is they're going to take more than 1 or 2 nuggets away, just due to the breadth of experience that we have in the virtual room. So just in terms of governance, I did a bit of some research, and I do a lot of training with governors as well now in my exec leadership role. And I looked at some data from the National Governance Association. They undertook one of its largest surveys in 2024. And out of 300,000 governors, 3,000 responded to their survey, which is something as well that maybe we need to unpack. Why aren't people responding to surveys? But hey, they said that the data, drilling down in the data, was not always that easy to find. But what they did find was that in terms of gender, there's broadly a 50-50 split in terms of the gender representation on boards. They quote that 79% of governors are educated to at least degree level. And that was from Governors for Schools, actually. But the NGA gave data that showed that 95% of governors are white, 2% are Asian, 1% from Black, African, Caribbean backgrounds, and 2% from a mixed heritage background. So that kind of gives us a flavor for the gender and the ethnic diversity mix. And there's also something about age in terms of who's sitting on our boards. And I know that Sam's going to talk a bit about how we can kind of incubate our own. But what the NGA found was that 9% of governors were below the age of 40. 10% below the age of 30, 17% age between 40 and 49. And then they gave a figure of 41% of governors are retired. And, you know, there's no doubt that all of those demographics bring their own uniqueness and their wealth of information. And we can't negate the fact that governors, it's a volunteer role. So we have to kind of give thanks that we've got, you know, these governors in the space. But our conversation is really going to kind of focus on what could we do more of, and how can we actually begin to change the stats that are currently staring us in the face. So I've kind of framed the conversation. I'm going to ask our panelists to give their reflections, their provocations, their own piece on the pipeline. And then I might kind of draw us all together with some cross dialogue. Anybody watching live, please drop your questions in the question and answer panel. I'll try and kind of pick some up. But for now, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to hand over to Sam and just ask you to kind of give us maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes on kind of reflections, provocations, and what your views are.
Thank you. I think it's quite impossible to talk about this issue of diversifying governance without considering whether we're sort of actively discouraging some more diverse folks from joining us by what we do and how we do it. So if you look, and Sharon's nodding, she's already like, yeah. So if you look, I'll tell you a story first. I went out of my way to get someone onto a board. This was about, God, 10 years ago now. I worked so hard to get her. Okay. She had amazing expertise. She was going to be the best governor ever, local level. And she came on, she lasted maybe 3 meetings and then she left. And the reason was our meeting started at 5:30. She could barely make it from work. The meetings were too long and kind of pointless, I'm afraid to say. The reports were too long. All that we ever asked them to do was sit on panels and exclude people. Think about that. Just that in and of itself. She thought, you know what? This is not for me. So I'm not saying that, of course, they have to sit on panels, and of course, they have to fulfill statutory responsibilities, and of course, they have a job to do. But we should consider how we do what we do and how we do it. Shorter, sharper meetings, shorter, sharper reporting, being really focused, doing it at a time of day when people can actually make it if they have children or if they have jobs where employers are not giving them time off, which sadly is kind of the case across the piece. And so for me, until we actually examine what we do ourselves and how we practice governance, I don't think we're going to actually be able to bring folks in, especially the younger crowd who are just going to look at governance and think, oh, that's not very good. I'm not really interested in that at all. You know, 200 pages of sort of reporting for every meeting is just going to turn them off. And again, we have a job to do, but I think we could do it better. And we're stuck in legacy ways of doing things. We do need to modernize. We do need to become more streamlined and efficient. And that way, we'll actually expand the pool of folks who will actually decide that governance is about people and it's about relationships and it's about communities and about so much more than just policies, agendas, and all the kind of boring, stodgy governance stuff. So for me, that's the first place to start.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'll probably come back to you once I've invited the other panelists. But I think people listening in would be really interested to hear where you may have seen it done differently. So are there some good examples out there that somebody listening in might think, I just want to go and have a chat too. I just want to see how. So if I can ask you just to kind of hold that, and then I'll kind of draw you back in shortly. So thank you for that. That's really helpful. Vivienne, can I ask you to give your reflections?
Certainly, and I'd like to reflect on what Sam said first, because when I became a chair of governors in London, I'd come out of being a head teacher. So there was no way, as a governing body, we were going to have, we were going to work in the way you were quite rightly saying, doesn't bring anybody in at all. And the school itself was a very diverse school because it was sat just behind King's Cross. And I was fortunate enough to become chair of governors when a new head was coming in. So we could decide exactly what kind of ways in which we were going to work as a governing body. It's 60 years at the moment since the first race relations report. So this is a really important discussion, I think, because I don't think we've moved on enough at all in any way since then. And governors have a duty to comply with the Equality Act in 2020. But again, I don't really see that happening widely. In the article myself and Fee Stagg wrote, we included two people who we thought at the time were doing it really, really well. One is Yinka in London, who most people will know, and the other was a school in Birmingham. Now, they were working in diverse areas already, but they still had to work hard to change the look and the feel of governance. So we will send you that article through and have a look at that, because there's some still, I think, very relevant case studies in it. We've got to remember what the purpose of governance is. And it's about ethical leadership around the values and the community that the school or the trust works within and works for. And also through recruitment and arguing that ethical can't be diverse unless we have got so many different and diverse thoughts there. one of the case studies that we worked with said that, again, another thing we shouldn't do is only look at the skill set of governors, because that is going to potentially limit what we do. And they were working on, in a very successful way, bringing the perspectives of governors into the discussion and making sure that they got the chance to articulate their perspectives. And those perspectives were not the same as the white men and women in the organisation all the time. So I think that's a key issue. What are the things that we do need to do in a governing body that would mean a diverse group of people, men, women, people with disability, people with different orientations, age, as you were saying, Evelyn? How do we have conversations that mean they can all bring their own perspectives into that and be welcomed with that? In the school where I was chair of governors, we had a lot of parents as governors. And after about 2 meetings, I went to talk to all the parents and said, why are you not talking? It's wonderful you're here, but if you don't tell us what you're thinking, we're not going to benefit from you being here. And from then on, I always asked them what they wanted to contribute. I think far too many times in some governance meetings, there are people who don't say anything at all. So they're there representing something, but we need to hear what it is they want to represent. And I think those are really basic things that aren't always happening in most governance groups.
Yeah. I think that's a really relevant point, and it talks to that. So the whole ethical leadership lens talks to the culture of the school, the climate of the school, and people who aren't speaking up. Is there something about the psychological safety that has or has not been created in that space to enable them to bring their different perspective maybe to the conversation? So there's a piece on culture that maybe people who are listening in might kind of want to reflect on when they're looking at the dynamics of their trust and governing boards. Some really interesting points from both panelists thus far, but there's more to come. So I'm just going to draw Patrick in and just ask for your contributions.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And again, I'm going to agree and endorse everything that's been said so far, because it resonates really strongly. As a head teacher, the power of governance is something that I'm very, very much aware of. The responsibility that governors have is huge, and I'm always conscious that it's done by volunteers. And I think there is something that's quite special about a situation where volunteers actually have so much power. So the whole thought process that goes into recruitment is a really critical one. And I think, my first kind of reflection really is I sat on a similar forum to this a couple of weeks ago that was about unblocking the pipeline to headship. And one of the key things, of course, is to think about the governors and the trustees, because ultimately it's really difficult to talk about racial equality and equity and leadership without addressing those people that are there to hire and fire and shape policy. So I think the first thing for me is that the importance of getting the governance right and making sure that that is diverse has a critical role, because that's where you do your hiring and firing of your school leaders. I think for me, again, thinking about what it is governors do, decisions about budgets and exclusions, curriculum, leadership, all of those things are there to shape the the offer that a school has for the community that it serves. And so governance that doesn't reflect the community is less likely to get that right. And I think that, that simple point that says, that if boards reflect the communities that they serve, they are more likely to make better and fairer decisions. Never a certainty, but I think it increases that possibility. And I wanted to end with a very specific example of something that I'm aware that took place. Now, I hasten to say it wasn't at my school, just in case any of my school community are watching, but I was at a conference where I got into a conversation with a colleague. It was actually about diversity. And we got into a conversation about something that happened in my colleague's school where there was a permanent exclusion hearing. And the young person who was being excluded was a young white boy. Now, at the end of the hearing, where the decision by the governors was to uphold the exclusion, there was a comment that was made by one of the governors who was on the panel, a middle-aged white man. And he said, wow, that was one of the toughest decisions that I've ever had to make, because I look at this boy and he could be my son. Now, I don't know whether he recognized it at the time, the significance of what he was saying. But ultimately, it makes you think, doesn't it? Because would it have been as difficult a decision if the person sat in front of him being examined and judged did not look like someone who could possibly have been his son that he could relate to? And so on a very practical, personal decision-making basis, that for me was an example of why diversity really matters.
Yeah, that's a really powerful story. Yeah, it's made me so wow, and I'm sure people listening. I think there's two things that you said, Patrick. So maybe we can pick this up in a conversation after we've heard from Sharon. But something around training for governors, just in terms of unconscious bias, what that might look like. I talk to loads of trust leaders, and I say, when was the last time you've had some training? And it's like, so maybe that's something that we might kind of want to explore. And something about the communities that we serve. So, and before the call started, you mentioned the word intentionality, right? So I just want to go back to that bit, just so we don't lose it. But so I'm doing this piece of work with loads of trust leaders, and some of them will challenge me when I say, it's really important to have diversity. It's about reflecting the communities that we serve. And some of them will say to me, but Evelyn, my community is predominantly white British. My governors and my trust board are white British. So we are reflecting the community that we serve. And my response is always, but how intentional are you with your recruitment process? What does that actually look like? And if you have tried and tried and tried and you still can't get diverse representation, then I encourage you to look inwards at what you're doing in your schools to make sure that your predominantly white children are getting an experience of diversity through the curriculum, through celebrations, etc., etc. So you mentioned it before, but that thing about intentionality, do you just want to, anything you want to add on the intentionality piece?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's really simple. If you do this in a half-hearted way, and do what you've always done, and expect that you're going to get diverse people, applying to be governors, then it's not going to happen. You have to decide this is something that we want to happen, and you need to decide what strategy you're going to use to make it happen. You can't wait for it. You've got to say, we are going to make this happen, and this is what we can do to force it. And I think that's important.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Sharon, you've been listening and I think you've been scribbling, but I know you've got a lot that you'd also kind of like to share with us. So would really love to hear your reflections before we kind of go maybe into a more of a fluid kind of group conversation.
Okay, I'll try and be as concise as possible. But um, we put a lot of work into recruiting and very little into retaining.
Yeah.
And I think we need to flip that,
Yeah.
focus on the retention. What I've started to do with the trust that I'm with is even before somebody is appointed, I have a one-to-one conversation with them, irrespective of where they are in the organization, whether it's they're coming on board as a member, a trustee, or a local governor. I have a conversation with them before they're exposed to the school or the head or the chair to give them the reality check of what being a governor or a trustee or a member means, because it's always sold to them as, oh, it's just 4 or 5 meetings a year.
Yeah.
It's not much,
Yeah.
and that's not the reality. We know that that's not the reality. And what we're looking for is a commitment to the commitment. So they can commit, but then, they may not turn up at meetings and things like that. So I want to get in on the ground and find out if they really are going to commit to the commitment. Otherwise, I will be very honest with them and say, maybe it's not for you at this time. I also automatically, whichever school they want to join or identify, or whether it's the trust board, I share the dates with them for those meetings.
Yeah.
Because again, it's hard to go right through the recruitment process and then you release the dates and find out that half of them they can't make it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's the practical things that we can do so that they're not set up to fail.
Yeah.
And we haven't spent a lot of time working on getting this person on board, only to find that, their new job doesn't allow them, doesn't release them for X, Y, or Z. So focus a lot on the retention as well as the actual recruitment. What we've also got to do is understand that we've got consumers and customers in our schools. The customers are the parents, the stakeholders, the consumers are our children. And understand that generationally, there is a significant change in almost every child in our school today are Generation Alpha or Generation Z. And I mean, anybody who's heard me speak before knows I talk a lot about this, and it's understanding that their mindset is different. And if we are setting the strategic direction for their school and we don't understand who they are and the world they are operating in, then we failed.
Yeah.
I used to talk about, governing boards reflecting the community they serve. No, they have to reflect the global landscape, because our children are global citizens from birth.
Yeah.
They know nothing other than the world. I remember going to school and having to go to the library to find out, what was going on in the rest of the world, or read a newspaper. Our children don't have to do that anymore. They are automatic global citizens, and we have to prepare them for that world. And we have to do that immediately and daily. So their environment, irrespective, I did a lot of work with Suffolk County Council, and that is, I think, 95% white British. So yes, they will struggle with getting diversity around the table, but that doesn't take away from what they can do. When I walk into any school, I want to see myself. I want to see myself on the walls. I want to see myself in the libraries. I love books. And there are so many books by diverse authors now that are just not getting into schools for some reason. Children want to be able to see, irrespective of who they are, difference.
Yeah.
They are demanding it now as well. I remember on the back of George Floyd's murder, a school trust in Birmingham, where I live, all of the head girls and head boys got together virtually, because it was during lockdown, got together and wrote an open letter. And when I say open, they put it online. It was an open letter to the trust about their trust. They came together and they listed all the things that they felt needed to change in their respective schools within this trust. One of the most significant things was they wanted teachers to pronounce their names properly.
Yeah.
That is just something that blew my mind, you know, but they were tired of having to almost pretend that it was okay, because it's not okay.
Yeah.
But also challenging why they don't see any Black or Asian teachers in their schools.
Yeah.
At any level.
Yeah.
I live in Birmingham, and we are more than 50% non-white British, but yet still the problem exists in the city, where the further up you go in schools is the less diverse it is. In a city that has so much diversity, that's a massive problem.
Yeah.
When you were talking, Patrick, about, I think it was Patrick, about exclusion panels, one of the things that I do as a governance professional, the first question I ask when an exclusion panel is being put together is, what is the race and gender of the child? And then I try and reflect that on the panel, because that is important.
Yeah.
The example that you gave, I've watched an Asian male chairing a panel speak to an Asian child in a way, culturally, in a way that anybody else on the panel, A, wouldn't be able to do, and B, probably wouldn't understand the cultural significance of that connection. We have a way of speaking to each other. I've recently done some work with a Japanese school, and culturally, I had to understand, I had to get under the skin of how that school operates before I could go in there and talk to them about governance. They don't make decisions in meetings. Like how are you even operating if you don't make decisions in meetings? But culturally, they don't do that. Understanding that people will bring their difference to make a difference. And if that space isn't prepared for that difference, it will always be seen as a challenge.
Yeah.
And I've had members of MBGN say to me, you know, Sharon, I can't stay in this school because, you know, every time I open my mouth, you know, it's like I'm putting somebody's back up, you know, and all I'm doing is asking a question.
Yeah.
Because we've got to a point sometimes in our schools where we are so used to rubber stamping things and accepting things and not being challenged on things, that anybody coming in and asking a simple question would be viewed as, oh, not sure they're the right fit.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll give you an example as I'm finishing here. I'm part of a network of high profile Black individuals. And I had a conversation with somebody last week who manages a £2 billion budget. 2 billion, very young, born in Jamaica, has worked on every continent across the globe, and manages £2 billion for her company. And I'll say to her, are you interested in becoming a governor? And she's like, I never thought about it. And you know, I never heard of it.
Yeah.
And it's because we only tend to advertise or promote amongst the people we know.
100%.
We don't have any kind of campaigns. You know, governance isn't a staple in conversation. You say to anybody, I'm a lawyer, I'm an accountant, I'm a doctor, and people know what that is. You say I'm a governor, or I'm a trustee, or I work in governance. What's that?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's about changing that. And I think that we can do that with our sixth formers.
Yeah.
We can start succession planning from our sixth formers.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've worked in schools where they've had student voice around that governance table, or they've had student voice come in and make presentations to the governing board. Making that connection is important, because if you can get somebody as a governor, whether it's an associate role or not, you can get somebody to take governance seriously from the age of 18 to 20. You've got a governor for life.
Yeah.
One form or another. And because we've got 41% who are retired, those 41% will disappear very quickly all at the same time. And that will leave a massive gap in terms of our volunteering. So if we are not starting to fill that, then where will governance be?
Yeah. And I think the point, I mean, you've all made some brilliant points, just kind of concluding with Sharon's point. And I think the one that's kind of really resonated with me is about reflecting the global landscape. And just in terms of the generational kind of issue that we potentially, you know, our children are, you know, Generation Z, and you know, and so our governors have kind of got to kind of lean into that. So that's definitely, I think, a strong takeaway that people listening in. We've got a couple of questions from some people who are listening in, but I just want to tag on to Sam the point around incubating our own, because Sharon has just kind of mentioned that about our sixth formers, and I know that you had a few things that you wanted to say. And then I'm just going to go to the questions and just kind of give them to the panel just to ask for your responses.
Yeah, so we have a group of trusts and one of the dioceses down in the Southwest that have started a project they're calling Next Generation Governance Southwest, focusing on 18 to 25-year-olds. This is exactly the point you were making, Sharon. If you get them early and you introduce them to governance in a way that's not high stakes. So you might start by putting them on a committee of a local board, or on a local board, and then you work their way up to becoming trustees, and you've just created this pipeline. And I think the visibility point, I had written it down to say it if no one else said it, but you absolutely said it. The visibility point is huge. So many of the generation under 40 don't even think about governance. It's not even on their radar. It's not even a question of them not wanting to do it. They literally don't know about it. So I think the visibility point is really important. And how we recruit, not just not doing it in our own image, using different channels, social media, using videos. Like, why do we do everything in this old-fashioned way? Like, let's get with it. Let's start doing the Gen Z stuff.
Yeah, and I think there's the Gen Z stuff for sure, but there's also something about some of our communities. I think the way we present governance is like, whoa, what is that? You know, I couldn't possibly.
Well, it's intimidating.
It's intimidating. So when I'm talking to people, I say, hey, you know those banners we all make for our open evenings and we're the flashiest school? I say, have you ever thought about going down to the local library, taking some kind of tea and biscuits and just breaking down the word governance and just kind of see if you can, you know, work with the communities rather than kind of expecting them to come to us. So the visibility piece, I think you're right. There's kind of the you know, Generation Z, but then there's other ways that we can hopefully try and bring our communities in. So some really interesting reflections that you've shared. I've got two questions in the chat from people who are listening in, and I'll take the first one, which is probably just kind of what we've been talking about, but if anybody wants to add to it. So Andrea is asking, what are the barriers to becoming a governor? Are barriers the same across the country? So anybody? Yeah, Vivienne.
I think it's very different if you are looking for governors in a city compared to rural areas.
Yeah.
And I'd be interested to know what people's views are on governors coming together physically, or can we make use of this kind of technology? And does that still give us the feeling that it is a proper governors discussion? Because in rural areas, that's so much harder to get people to come together physically in that way, particularly if you're out in Suffolk, Norfolk, any of those areas, as well as others, of course. So I think there is a difference depending on the geography of where the school or the trust is. And in trusts, those trusts that are spread around the country, then that must be exactly the same issue, because the trustees of the trust are going to be coming from all over the country.
Yeah.
So I think those are challenges, definitely. And because I'm a member of a trust in London, I can't always get there. So we do regularly have online discussions like this. And I haven't found it any worse than actually being there in the room. If anything, it speeds everything up.
Yeah, which talks to, I think it was Sam's point around, changing the face of governance in terms of those long, lengthy meetings, those reams of paper. That might be, a valid answer to it. Sam, did you have your hand up for that one?
Yeah, only because I do think it's important for boards to get together in person. I think it does make a difference. I also think it's important for boards as much as possible to get into schools and actually see the children, which is actually what this is all about. Often doesn't happen at all. And so Castle Phoenix Trust is the one I always comes to mind. They have completely changed their governance approach. They looked at how many meetings they had. It was way too much. The reporting was over the top. And so they limited it down in terms of in-person meetings to just 3 a year, but it was in a school and they got to walk around the school. And so they got that really in-depth experience. And then the rest of their meetings, as you say, were online, short, sharp during the year to take care of business here and there. And that's the way to do it, is to look at and by the way, they got rid of all their committees except audit and risk. And they gave each of the trustees a portfolio. It's a totally different way of looking at governance. It's fast, it's sharp. Their entire trust board report is 19 pages. And it can be done, Sharon. Have you seen it? I'm going to have to send it to you. It's amazing. And the thing is, we can do it like this. We can do a mix of online and person. It can be meaningful when you are in person, right? You can add that value of going into schools. And you still have incredible strategic discussions. You still do governance, right? And you can bring in more folks because they're not, because the problem is people are time poor. Time is the question was about barriers.
Yeah.
It's time.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you for that, Sam. Patrick, your hand went up and then it went down.
Yeah, just to be a brief point in terms of barriers, networking is a barrier because so many of the governance roles are filled by personal and professional connections.
Yeah.
And so if you're not within those networks, then you don't get those conversations and those invitations. I think that's something that we really need to think about.
Yeah. I think that's, I remember when I was ahead in the early days, I always say in the early days, like when a governor leaves and then we all look at each other and say, do you know anybody in your networks that can come and fill the post? Because you're so desperate and you've got 20 million other things to do. But actually, if you just kind of pause and reflect, actually, you're 100%, if we always do what we always do, we always get what we always got, and therefore we kind of get the same people around the table. So that networking, I think, is a really key point. We have got another question, which we've kind of touched on, but, would welcome any other additional kind of reflections on. How would you suggest that being a governor trustee is promoted more within diverse communities? For example, are road shows needed in community centres or places of worship? And I kind of spoke to that a little bit, but Patrick, any contributions?
So one of the things that one of my local primary schools did, that the chair of governors decided that he wanted to have a more diverse governing board. So he went into the community and basically visited like all of the local businesses and shops and just said, you are the people of our community. Your children come to our school. We need you. And did an active face-to-face convincing recruitment. We need you. This is why we need you. This is what you can do. And that changed things like that in a heartbeat.
Yeah. that's that intentionality point, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna walk those shops. I'm gonna go in. I'm going to go to places of worship, community centres.
Exactly.
I'm going to talk to people. I'm intentional with what I want to change here, and I think, yeah, we are time poor as leaders and peoples in school, but actually we've got to think about where we're going to put our time for certain things, and yeah, that could bring about change. I've got a question here which says, does the recruitment process put off those in lower socioeconomic households without degrees slash in professional roles? And I think that talks to the statistic that 79% of governors are educated to at least to degree level. So people might be thinking, oh, we've got to have a degree to be a governor. Anybody kind of want to just offer some reflections? Does the recruitment process put off those in lower socioeconomic households without degrees slash not in professional roles?
Yes, it absolutely does.
Okay.
I think one of the things that I tend to focus on is always be recruiting, and don't just wait until you've got a vacancy, because that then changes your approach to it as well. So we don't utilize the associate role as much as we should do. So I remember working for an air ambulance charity, and it was actually written in their articles that you had to serve as an associate trustee for 6 months before you could be appointed as a trustee, which I think is brilliant because it's probation. We do it in work all the time.
Yeah.
Probationary period, all the time, a try before you buy on both sides, really. And it's one of the reasons why when I'm talking to people, I talk to everybody all the time about governance. I talk to my nephews who are teenagers, and it's about planting those seeds.
Yeah.
So you don't want to necessarily go in to everybody that you speak to and say, do you fancy becoming a governor? But find out more about them, have a conversation with them, and then explain how their skills could be used in school. And I think that's important because we know what's in it for us, but we never think about what they're getting from it. And it's not enough now to say, it will be great CPD or anything like that, because people are giving up their time. Why do they want to do that? And I think it's building that relationship. One of the things, I've done a lot of work with the Church of England, and I'm about to start another contract with them actually. And it amazed me that they'd never thought about approaching the Black-led churches, where there are hundreds of them. And I'm like, the Christians meet the Christians. It's like, this is not rocket science. And what I actually did was, because I grew up in New Testament, which is just a denomination of one of the Black-led churches, and so I got one of the national ministers to come on a Zoom training course with me, and he explained his experience of governance because he'd been a parent governor, but also how to approach Black-led churches. So, you don't necessarily go in and say, oh, we're looking for governors. We're only here because we're looking for governors. Go and break bread. Go and have a conversation. Go and share a prayer, share a conversation and build those relationships. Because it's understanding that a lot of experiences of diverse communities, their experience of the education system in this country is very different. To mainstream. When I was at school, I was told not to expect to be more than a good factory worker. And that was in the 80s. My daughter went to a grammar school and was still told that trying to be a barrister might be a stretch for her. And it is amazing the conversations that people will have off the cuff, just flippantly, but
Yeah.
the impact that it has
Yeah.
on those children and on the parents of those children can scar them for life in terms of the education system. So there is work to be done.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it can be done. It
Yeah.
can definitely be done.
Yeah. Thank you. I've got one final question, which I just asked for a panelist reflection, and then to wrap up, I'll ask people for kind of a closing kind of statement or something they'd like to leave people with. But the question is, what are the panel members' thoughts to the governor actual application process? So, you know, community members can show interest, and then they're put, oh, the question's gone, and then they're put off by the actual application. You know, the person who posed the question was mindful that, of course, we need kind of safeguarding training, safer recruit, all of that is a given. But the actual application can be off-putting. And I wonder, is there anything we can do about that? Anybody want to jump in there?
Yes, we don't have to bombard them right at the beginning.
Okay.
Which is why at the beginning I said that I try to have a conversation before they've completed an application. Just give me a name and an email address, and I will book a 10-15 minute Teams call with them and just have a conversation, so that then when I'm sending the application, it's not as daunting. You know, because it could have the skills audit with it and all that kind of stuff, and it's just, it can be too much, too intimidating. So forget all of that. There are no rules here. It's about finding out who the individual is, and I would much rather. And you can, the beauty about what you can do now is record the call, so you're capturing, obviously with their permission, you record their conversation, because people will give you nuggets about themselves that they won't think is anything major, but you think, oh my God, this is amazing. You know, and if you capture that and then just throw it into Copilot and ask Copilot to summarize this person, you know, and then you bounce it back to them. To say, you know, are you happy for me to put this forward to the chair of the and the head of the school? And they're usually like, oh my God, who is this person? You know, they don't recognize themselves. I would never have put that on the form in that way. So it's finding another way. Find another way that is going to make them feel comfortable and get them to see their value that they're bringing to the table, and that you recognize the value that they're bringing to the table. So it is a two-way street, and just you know, one way.
So it's definitely doable, and I hope that we can, you know, we can share this recording widely, because the nuggets that have been shared tonight are just fantastic. So whilst I give the panelists just kind of a minute to think about their closing remarks, over the past hour we focused on lots of things really. There's something about the purpose of governance and looking at ethical leadership. There's something about what's the culture of our schools and our trusts and governing boards that are really going to encourage people to want to actually stay. You know, Sharon, you spoke a lot about the retention piece, so we've kind of focused on that as well. There's something around incubating our own, you know, I kind of shared the stats around, you know, how many people under 40, you know, the retirement ages. So there's something about incubating our own. There's something about reflecting the community and the global landscape. There's something about people being really intentional. You know, as Patrick was saying, his chair of governors, you know, you go into your local community because our schools need you. But I think that kind of comes with intentionality. We heard about the importance importance of breaking bread, right? You know, people just kind of going to, you know, different places of worship, and let's just break bread and let's kind of come together for the better of our communities. I think there's something about the whole recruitment process and the training that, you know, should be regular, should be frequent, so that we're not losing that example that Patrick gave earlier on about the exclusion panel. You know, there's something about doing right by our children in our schools, those global citizens, that everybody who's making the decisions needs to understand them and their lived experience and the differences that we all bring. I think it's been a brilliant conversation. I have to say, I've made many notes because I'm now going to kind of share these with all these trust leaders that I'm working with. So Sharon, I've taken down your info at. I'm going to put it on my slide deck, if you don't mind, just so that they can get in touch with you, because you know lots, and this is your bag, right? So so I hope that people listening in have also got as much from it as I know I have, and I'm sure our panelists have. But I always like to end these types of webinars with a, hey, what's your final reflection for tonight, Sam?
I think I'm just really excited about the next phase of governance in England. I think we're entering a whole new phase where we are going to chuck some of the old legacy ways of doing things. We're going to bring fresh new people in with fresh thinking. It's going to be younger. It's going to be more diverse. It's going to be more about relationships and community anchoring, and all of that's going to be necessary because actually, as we all know, education is kind of plateaued, if you will. We've got some wicked problems we can't solve, persistent absence, disadvantage gap. We've got some real issues that we're not able to solve with the same problem, the same solutions that we had before. So for me, I'm just excited about this next phase and the role that governance can actually play in solving some of these problems. So yeah,
thank you.
I'm
Thank
very
you,
optimistic.
Sam. Yeah, I'm loving the energy. Loving the energy. Patrick, closing remarks.
So I think for me, one of the critical things is that people have to be convinced that representation actually matters in order for it to be a priority. And so I think it's important to remember that it's not just about the optics of who's around the table, but it's actually about having a variety of perspectives that will inform better decision making. And I have to come back to that kind of that intentionality bit again. You know, some questions that people need to ask themselves, you know, like who is around your governing body table or who's missing? You know, when was the last time that you recruited governors from outside of your normal networks, your typical networks? What would be different if we had a board that was more diverse than the one that we have? So I think these are things that are really important for governing bodies to consider.
Yeah, thank you. Sharon, your closing remarks?
Really, just don't give up. You know, it is, I always try and focus on things we must do, things we should do, and things we could do. And I just take one per term. Because sometimes we can go in for this massive plan, 3-year strategy, all of this, and it's just too big. I would rather do, okay, let's what's one thing we can do differently this term that will move us forward, and having them smaller and achievable will help to keep the momentum rather than, you know, take 12 months, 18 months to formulate this plan, and by then we've lost a whole generation of children through our schools. So it's, you know, don't give up and just take the small wins.
Yeah, thank you. And the final kind of closing remarks. Thank you, Vivienne.
I think I've been trying to formulate how you can define governance in that way. And we've talked a lot this evening about recruitment, etc. Whereas I think what's coming out of our conversations now is that it should be a constant discussion. So not just when, as Sharon said, somebody leaves, and it isn't just for the moment. It's going to be a constant discussion always about how we can get more varying perspectives, more varying experiences into our governance, because that's what our schools need, possibly more than they've ever needed it. And I would really like that to be at least something that our people who are listening are really going to focus on in that way.
Yeah. I think that's a really grounding point, like now more than ever, you know, political climate, the fragility of the world. We need that perspective to be making the decisions about the children that we serve, because it is about the children that we serve. So I think we've had a brilliant discussion. I think that it's 8:01, and so that kind of timely piece of let's have a real deep discussion, but kind of do it in a timely way. And I just want to say a massive thank you to the panelists for coming this evening and coming with some real good nuggets. There was more than two. You know, I've got a whole page. There was kind of more than two nuggets that people listening in can take away. And like Sam, optimistic for the future. And let's hope that we see a different landscape of governance going forward. So it's a thank you from us on this panel, and it's a good night.